Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we are going to unpack a truly fascinating piece of visual history. We're going to explore the hidden story behind the shapes that surround us every single day. If you've ever wondered why the objects you use look the way they do, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to dive deep into a design revolution that changed literally everything, simply by refusing to stay inside the box. So I want you to take a quick second and just look around your immediate surroundings. Seriously, look at your smartphone, look at your laptop screen, take a look at the desk in your room, or even the square building you might be sitting inside right now. Why is almost everything in our human-made world built on artificial right angles? We are living in a world that is quite literally trapped in a box. But today's explainer focuses on a guy who recognized this invisible trap and decided to do something completely radical about it. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, War Against the Box. A 3D philosopher's rebellion. To lead this rebellion, we have to look at Luigi Colani. This guy was a designer and a self-proclaimed three-dimensional philosopher who actually studied aerodynamics at the Sorbonne in Paris. Born in 1928, this 3D philosopher looked at our square, rigid world about 40 years ago and officially declared war on it. And this contrast really perfectly illustrates exactly why he was so frustrated. On one side, we have the natural world. Think about it. The Earth is round, planets are round, our own human cells are round. The inherent nature of the entire universe is built on curves and spheres. But then, on the other side, we have the human-made world, completely obsessed with boxes, squares, and rigid grids. Colani saw an absolute absurdity in this. Why on earth should human creations fight against the very geometry of the universe? Which brings us to his ultimate battle cry. There are no straight lines in the universe. And he delivered this message with intense, unapologetic energy. Colani was often viewed as a bit of a mad, futuristic genius. Picture a guy with iconic white hair, a massive mustache, usually holding a cigar, just aggressively challenging the status quo. But as you'll see as we go through this so-called madman is actually the secret mastermind behind the ergonomic shapes of the modern gadgets you're holding in your hands right now. Moving right along to Section 2, the secret of biodesign, nature's blueprint. You see, Colani didn't just complain about boxes. He created a total paradigm shift in how we understand and actually manufacture physical objects. Let's see how this builds into an actionable philosophy that he called biodesign. The crucial point here is defining exactly what that is. It's a design philosophy rooted in the core belief that nature's evolutionary shapes are structurally and aerodynamically perfect. Colani realized that human engineers were racking their brains trying to invent efficient shapes, completely ignoring the fact that nature had already done all the hard work for us. Nature already holds the blueprint for the most frictionless, perfect designs in existence. Now, what's really wild here is this massive number, 3.8 billion. That is the number of years of evolutionary trial and error that nature has under its belt. When you look at the curve of a shark's fin gliding through the ocean, or, the exact aerodynamic arch of a bird's wing, you aren't just looking at a pretty shape. You are looking at the direct result of 3.8 billion years of physics testing. Colani basically asked, how could our basic human geometry possibly compete with that? And this brings us to a harsh but incredibly eye-opening critique. When we compare nature's evolution against what Colani bluntly called human laziness, the contrast is just stark. Nature's designs are perfect, they're frictionless, they're aerodynamic, so why do we build boxes? Well, simply because a straight line is easier for a factory machine to cut. A square fits perfectly into an engineering grid. It's cheap. Colani argued that we surround ourselves with sharp corners entirely out of manufacturing laziness, and we completely ignore what is actually natural and comfortable for the human body. To fight this laziness, Colani had to change how creation happened from the ground up. He famously said, "I don't design, I sculpt space." He absolutely refused to use standard grid paper to sketch out his ideas. Instead, his whole process was highly tactile. He would literally take wet clay and plaster and sculpt objects directly with his hands. He felt the curves, finding the shape intuitively rather than mathematically plotting it out on a rigid 2D piece of paper. Okay, on to Section 3, Revolution of the Canon T90, the day electronics melted. Let's jump to a specific historical breakthrough that really proves his genius. The year is 1984. Now, I want you to imagine the standard cameras from the early 80s. They were heavy, rigid metal boxes. If a pro photographer held one for hours, their hand muscles would literally ache. So when the camera company Canon approached Colani to design something new, he didn't even think about the camera first. He thought about the human body. Here are the exact steps of his revolutionary process to fix that, which resulted in the Canon T90. First, he took a lump of wet clay and had a photographer squeeze it super tightly in their fist. Second, he took that exact imprint, that wavy, curved, negative space of the human palm, and decided, yep, that should be the body of the camera. Finally, he became the very first designer to tilt the shutter button forward at a diagonal angle, aligning it perfectly with the natural resting movement of the index finger. He prioritized the human hand over the machine. But as you can imagine, that design created a massive headache for Canon's engineers. They had never seen a camera body that looked like it was melting. They completely panicked, wondering how on earth they would fit standard, rigid circuit boards inside these crazy curves. But Colani's absolute stubbornness forced a technological leap. To make his design work, Canon had to invent flexible, paper-like circuit boards that could actually bend. And instead of using one massive, bulky motor, they had to break it down into 3 separate micromotors, hiding them right there in the curved corners of the camera. And here is why all of this matters to you today. That one camera changed consumer electronics forever. Just look at its modern descendants. Those incredibly comfortable, curved, ergonomic Logitech mice you use at work, the sweeping grips of your PlayStation 5 controller, the smooth, pocket-friendly curves of your modern smartphone. Every single one of these traces its design DNA straight back to Luigi Colani squeezing that wet clay back in 1984. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, the ultimate future triumph, vindicated by time. Now, progress is rarely a straight line. No pun intended there. Let's pivot to the tragedy and the ultimate triumph of Colani's career. Because while the T90 was a huge success, his grandest visions hit a major roadblock. Despite his undeniable genius, the 20th century manufacturing world just couldn't keep up with him. Factory owners looked at his designs. We're talking massive, hyper-aerodynamic, dolphin-shaped space trucks, or these sweeping, organic grand pianos, and they rejected them outright. The metal sheet manufacturing of the 1980s simply couldn't bend the way his mind did, without costing an absolute fortune. They labeled his designs impossible, wrote him off as a crazy futurist, and many of his most ambitious projects languished forever as nothing more than clay models in a garage. But, time has a funny way of revealing the truth. Let's look at what we're calling Colani's modern vindication. The technology of today has finally caught up to his brain. Just look at 3D printing. It doesn't require straight metal cuts. It can effortlessly print his liquid, complex curves using modern plastics or metals. And even more incredibly, look at generative AI, literally the cutting edge of engineering today. This is perhaps the ultimate irony, and honestly, the most beautiful vindication for Colani. When we ask the world's most advanced generative AI computers to design a car part or an airplane component that needs to be as strong and as lightweight as physically possible, the AI does not draw a square box. Nope. It organically calculates structures that look exactly like the intricate, curved, asymmetrical networks of human bones. The most advanced computational technology in the entire world has mathematically proven Colani's biodesign theory to be 100% correct. So what should you take away from this explainer? Luigi Colani taught us a truly invaluable lesson. Just because an industry or a society has followed a standard rule for a century doesn't mean it's actually the right way. True innovation often hides right behind the walls of the conventional boxes we're all trapped inside. We just have to be brave enough to break them. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. The next time you look at a rigid, square screen or some boring standard template at your job, I want you to think of Colani. Are you accepting a straight line just because it's easy? Will you say goodbye to the artificial boundaries and let your ideas flow as effortlessly and powerfully as nature itself? Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this visual journey today. Keep questioning the shapes around you and never stop exploring the history of how our